I decided to split the $3 million inheritance between my mom and me, shortly after my father's funeral, when Robert, without asking, looked through the inheritance documents. He said, "Kelly, don't be greedy, finally, I can quit my job. I should thank the old man for this." "Old man? Are you talking about my dad?" I asked, surprised. Ignoring me, Robert and my mother-in-law began excitedly planning to buy a new car and go shopping. Holding back my anger, I smiled and said, "Sure, use the money however you and Mom want." I'm Kelly Cohan, a 38-year-old housewife who also works with my husband. My parents, both doctors, owned a respected clinic in our town. As their only child, I grew up surrounded by love. After studying pharmacy, I got a job with a big pharmaceutical company. Though my parents were a little disappointed I didn't become a doctor, they supported me. When my mother died suddenly 10 years ago, my father and I were heartbroken. During that tough time, Robert, who was then my boyfriend, stood by me. We had met through friends, and 2 years after my mother's passing, he proposed. Robert worked in food service, earning much less than I did, but I believed we'd make a good team. My father was thrilled when he heard the news. "I've heard how supportive Robert's been." "Thank you, Robert. Please take care of her," my father said. Robert promised. "I'll make her happy." I was overjoyed standing beside him. The next week, we visited Robert's family to announce our marriage. His mother, wearing flashy makeup and recently divorced, looked me over critically. "A marriage, huh? Is she really the best you can do? Isn't she a bit old? Couldn't you find someone younger and prettier?" she asked. Robert quickly replied, "Mom, Kelly works at M Pharmaceuticals. Her father's a doctor with his own practice." I thought he'd talk about my character, but instead, he focused on my financial stability. Suddenly, his mother's attitude changed. "Oh, Robert, why didn't you say so sooner? That's different." "Nice to meet you, Kelly," she said, smiling. Although we got her approval, I felt uneasy. Just before we got married, my father gave me a luxury apartment in New York City as a wedding gift. I told Robert, "This is our new home, let's enjoy it together." Robert was thrilled, and we began our life together. But soon, I noticed some issues. Robert, who had lived with his parents until then, didn't know how to handle household chores. He couldn't cook, didn't know how to use the washing machine, and left messes everywhere. At first, I took on all the chores, even though it was tiring. By our second year of marriage, I couldn't keep up and asked Robert to share the work, but he dismissed me, saying, "You're better at it than I am, so you should do it." So, I was left doing all the chores. And that wasn't the only problem. I also discovered that Robert's mom had some unusual expectations. For her first Mother's Day, I sent her a nice scarf and flowers, but she called, upset. She complained that the scarf wasn't a luxury brand and scolded me for sending a cheap gift. I tried explaining its quality, but she insisted she wanted only designer items. Shocked. When I told Robert about his mother's rude reaction, he didn't support me and just said, "Do what she says." So, we started giving her money whenever she asked. Over time, she started coming by more often. Each time asking for money, Robert, without question, would always smile and hand her cash. Since Robert's income was limited, I had to cut back and even use our savings to make ends meet. Despite being frustrated, I reminded myself that Robert's mom had been important to him and to me during hard times, so I held on. Now, 8 years into our marriage, I was still managing all the chores and giving money to my mother-in-law. One day, my father, whom I hadn't seen for a while, called me for a talk. He told me something I was not prepared for. He had terminal cancer, and there was no treatment left. I was devastated, and he gently comforted me, saying, "Kelly, this is fate, let's accept it." After this, my days were filled with work, household tasks, and visits to my father's hospital. Though my job was flexible, juggling everything was tough. When I told Robert about my father's illness, he showed no sympathy or willingness to help. He just said, "Do your best," and visited my dad only once. I was so focused on my father that I had no time for Robert, but I wanted to be with my dad as much as possible. One day in the hospital, my father asked, "Kelly, how's your marriage with Robert?" His question caught me off guard, and I thought of all the struggles I faced with Robert and his mother. Sensing my hesitation, my father said, "Kelly, you don't have to endure. Think about your happiness. Don't worry, you'll be taken care of after I'm gone." I broke down, crying as he held my hand. 3 months later, my father passed away, and I was lost in sorrow. Organizing his funeral, Robert didn't help with any of it. Despite his indifference, I was grateful to the many friends who came to say goodbye to my father. The day after the funeral, a lawyer contacted me about my father's inheritance. At the meeting, I learned that my father had left over $3 million, thanks to his medical practice and real estate investments. As his only child, I would inherit it all. Back home, exhausted, I spread the inheritance papers out on the table and fell asleep on the sofa. When I woke up, I heard Robert and his mother talking cheerfully. Robert was holding the documents. "Wait, don't look at those without asking," I snapped, but my mother-in-law ignored me, excitedly saying, "Wow, $3 million, we're set for life." Robert then looked at me seriously and said, "Kelly, don't be too greedy, now I can finally quit my job." I thanked him, but then I realized what I said out loud. "Doddering old man? Are you talking about my dad?" Robert brushed off my shock, saying, "Anyway, let's get that inheritance into our joint account as soon as possible." Then, he and his mother started planning how they'd spend it on new cars and shopping. At that point, I could barely hold back my anger. They were acting like I was their maid, always expecting me to handle the housework, asking for money, and now insulting my father. I forced a smile and replied, "Sure, use the money however you and my mother-in-law please." Hearing this, my mother-in-law grinned, saying, "That's the attitude, keep working hard so our savings don't run out." I nodded and pretended to listen. From that point, Robert quit his job, and his mother practically moved in. They started living extravagantly, returning home with luxury items every day and dismissing my protests by saying, "Why worry, that $3 million will come in soon." When I warned Robert that I'd stopped the inheritance process, he ignored me. Then, a month later, he and his mother took off for Hawaii without inviting me. After they left, I decided it was time to act. When they returned, knocking on the door in matching aloha shirts, I spoke through the intercom. "I changed the locks. Go wait in a cafe nearby. I'll be there soon." At the cafe, I handed Robert a divorce petition. Both he and his mother were in shock, demanding explanations. "By the way," I said, "all that spending you've been doing, are you sure your finances are okay?" They laughed off my question, assuming they had enough left in the joint account, but when they checked, they were shocked to see it empty. I explained, "I moved the $50,000 as part of our property division." Furious, Robert sneered, "Fine, just hand over half of your dad's inheritance. Property is split equally in divorce." Calmly, I replied, "Actually, an inheritance isn't part of marital property, it's considered separate." Their faces fell as they checked the law on their phones. Then Robert pleaded, "Please don't divorce me. I have no money, no job, what will I do?" But I was firm. "Take responsibility for your actions. I'm divorcing you, and I'll go to court if needed." Intimidated by my resolve, they left. The divorce went through, and the $50,000 was counted as a fair split of our assets. Robert and his mother moved to a rundown apartment and struggled with debt from their lavish spending. I sold the condo we'd shared and moved to the apartment my father left me, cherishing my independence. With my father's inheritance, I'm financially secure and ready for a peaceful, happy future.